I'm very quiet.
Waiting for it to go away. Good morning and Fálce, and welcome to Sporting Heritage Conference 2020. This isn't, of course, the engine shed in Stirling, where we had hoped to hold this year's event, but I'm pleased to say that I'm in fact just a few miles away from the engine shed in Alloa, just along the road from Stirling. My name is Hugh Dan McLennan, and I'm a professional fellow at the Academy of Sport at the University of Edinburgh. I'm also one of the non-executive directors of Sporting Heritage UK, and I'm hosting this first session of the conference, which is, not surprisingly, about coping with COVID-19. Just a couple of things to say at the outset. First of all, our thanks to Dame Sarah for her truly inspirational opening to this year's event, a lesson in persevering, I suppose, and a fantastic insight into what it takes to reach the very top at your chosen sport, or two chosen sports as it happened. And we wish her all the best for her efforts in Tokyo in 2021. A couple of other things before we go. Please feel free to tweet while we're going ahead. At Sporting History is the tag with the hashtag Sporting Heritage 20. I'd like to thank the conference sponsors before we start as well, Core Creative and Studio MB. There's more information about them in the delegate pack, which you should all have by now. If you need any further information or how to contact them, there's information there. We're monitoring the chat facility. Obviously, there's no opportunity to present questions live, as it were. So if you do want to have any part in the discussions with the panelists, if you want to send us a question, we're monitoring the chat facility and we'll build that in as we go ahead. And if there was a prize for the first question, I'm pleased to say that we've had a question from Australia already. We don't have any prizes, but if we did, we would award the prize to Isabel Andrewartha in the Melbourne Cricket Club, the Australian Sports Museum there. But we'll come back to that because I think it's going to be very relevant to the topic we have this morning, particularly Andrew's talk. I haven't used the word unprecedented yet. Let's see how far we can get through to this morning session without hearing it. Our first speaker, the theme for the morning session is digital delivery and at-risk collections. Our first speaker is Vicky Hope Walker. And I have to say, just by word of warning, she has to leave perhaps 10 minutes before the end of the session because she has an appointment that she has to pick up there. So without any more ado, can I introduce you to our first speaker then this morning, Vicky, who's CEO of the National Paralympic Heritage Trust, and she's arrived wearing tinted 3D spectacles.
Thank you, Hugh. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a shame we're not there in the real, but this is what it is. I will get on with my presentation. I'm just going to get up and share that with you. Can you see that all right? Does that come up?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Excellent. Right. Okay then, well, the title of my presentation is, as you see, the kind of rose-tinted digital spectacles. I chose that title because of the idea of the virtual tours and when you can do them with 3D goggles on, and everyone coming to terms with what engagement means around digital technology. How good is that engagement? So just to introduce us, we're a very new organisation, but many sporting organisations are. We were formed in 2015, and you can see there that we, a list of things that we kind of set out to do through collections, care, exhibitions, permanent displays. A very small museum, 54 square metres, is like a large living room. And then some small permanent displays as well at the National Spinal Injuries Centre, both of those at Stoke Mandeville, where the Paralympic Games began. And a website. Our website was sort of a virtual museum from the start, so lots and lots of history information on it, and learning and engagement. And I've just put at the bottom access, because access had to be the top of our agenda. If we weren't going to get that right, we were really, really going to mess up. But because of that, we put certain things in place that put us in a very good position when COVID-19 struck and we went into lockdown. First of all, we had virtual displays of our exhibitions and our permanent heritage centre. And we also had this virtual website. Now, we had these things to do with accessibility. It meant the virtual displays meant people with autism could look at where they were going before they visited. It also meant people who may not be able to reach us. Are you going to travel 100 miles to a living room sized museum? Maybe not. Or if you were housebound or bedridden, you would have access. We also had QR codes in place because tetraplegic wheelchair users wouldn't necessarily be able to put on headphones and touch buttons, but they often would have a way of scanning through a phone or an iPad connected to their wheelchair, maybe through facial movement, so that they could watch the films and things. So we were sort of quite well placed digitally when COVID struck. So for some reason, I'm not going, it's just too slow to move on. So we did a stock take, as I'm sure all of you did, very similar story. We were in a really, really fortunate position where we were financially secure. I wasn't having to spend time looking at putting people on furlough. So we started again from a good position. We had the virtual tours, we had our website like a digital museum. We had social media, but we were really using it as a kind of informal PR system. And we also had built-in digital governance, again, relating back to access. We could have meetings and make decisions digitally. And the other thing that we did the stock take on was volunteers. We had a new group of volunteers. We wanted to keep them engaged. They wanted to be engaged. That was really, really important. Sorry, it's just very slow to move to the next slide for some reason. Has it moved to the next slide?
Yeah.
Right, it's not showing it for me for some reason, but let me just check on here. Are you on the slide titled Pivoting Business?
Not yet, no. Stock take.
Right, I've just done that. I'm trying to move it, but it's not wanting to move on.
Could I suggest if everyone could just bear with us, there we have it. If everybody could bear with us while we're meeting all the particular challenges that this operation have. This is the first session, so hopefully we'll be able to iron these things out. But I think we've got it now, so maybe it's just a matter of timing rather than anything else. But anyway, on you go.
Lovely. So the first thing that we did, and again, I'm sure many of you did, was pivoted our business around what we could deliver virtually. There was lots of free training that popped up. So we looked at that training. All of us, I say all of us, there's only 2.5 of us actually looked at that training and did different things, which was very, very helpful. We then took our event program and thought, well, how can we make this all virtual? Things like the Meet the Paralympian we could do on Zoom. We could do live creative workshops on Facebook. So we started programming those in as they were programmed and experimenting and giving them a go. And we did get audiences. We also had a video tour of our Heritage Centre that we promoted. And that had very good attendance. I think it was nearly 300 people came and actually did that video tour. And we also held our first video volunteer Zoom meeting and had more volunteers attend than ever before because it was easy from them. And our volunteers are actually fairly spread out. So we kind of got underway and we were building our confidence. Then, of course, we started thinking how we could do more. And we started doing, and I know many of you have done this as well, a weekly collections vlog. So a video blog of objects from our collection. And we were putting those out on social media. So suddenly we were using social media as a museum rather than as a PR tool, although it also acted as a PR tool. And then we discovered, and I'll show you this at the end, that our virtual tour, which is on a platform called Matterport, we could actually, in Zoom, take people into Matterport, and we could take them on a live virtual tour. So suddenly we had the ability not only to do presentations and workshops, but to take people into the Heritage Centre and give them a live tour, a personalised live tour. The first group I took around were a group of Japanese people involved in the planning of Tokyo 2020, or now 2021. We also took around some other groups, and we were part of the Disability Sport Festival in London, and we took them around and did a quiz as we went around and had really good feedback. So that was working for us, and we thought, well, if we can do that, we could go back to some of our charge tours where we give a tour of the Heritage Centre and a lecture to university students. So suddenly the kind of financial viability was coming into it as well. We also realised that our volunteers weren't digital savvy and not confident at using things like Zoom necessarily. So there was a need to look at their training and support them. And at the same time, one of my members of staff, Elaine Pirrie, she saw the opportunity to train the volunteers in oral history and set up an amazing program with the Oral History Society. And we've completed, I think to date, about 15 oral histories. So really, really fantastic stuff. So, but it was new ground for us. You know, it felt great and we were getting audiences, but what did it all mean? And how do we measure all of that? We were used to looking at numbers regarding social media. We were used to looking at numbers of people coming to the Heritage Centre. We had 37,000 visitors to the Heritage Centre in our first 11 months because we only opened in April 2019. Then between March of this year, so sort of mid to the end of March and the end of May, we knew that we had had 41,000 engagements stroke impressions and over 10,000 in-depth engagements and 9,000 website visitors. So in terms of an in-depth engagement, somebody doing more than just seeing us and swiping past, we knew that we were keeping up with the same audience numbers. But in addition, we had 30,000 other people that had glimpsed us or briefly engaged with us. How could we bring them into the fray more? We also saw that we had a growth of 137% in terms of followers through social media. And then more recently, and there's another story to this, we had an opportunity actually we needed to fill some more trustee posts. So we put out an advert, and one of the areas we were specifically looking at was trustees with digital know-how. And we were very fortunate in getting two in, Gail Lahi, who was director of digital at Panasonic and involved in the Olympic and Paralympic sponsorship programs, and also Jessica Macbeth from Lancashire University with kind of digital learning expertise. And we've been able to look and dig a bit deeper about what all this means as a consequence. And we have 3% of the monthly global Paralympic search on Google. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, but it shows us where we are, and it shows us how can we improve upon that. So what we needed was a really strong vision of where we might go with this. And we sat down and we now have worked together and produced a draft 5-year digital strategy. And I'm really, really excited about this strategy. It's not putting our kind of physical analog work to bed, of course it isn't. But I think what this year has shown us is that we can have much broader audiences, we can reach much further afield, certainly than a 54 square metre museum can do, and engage with people both in terms of making ourselves more accessible to people with disabilities, but also more accessible nationally and internationally. And I'll be very happy to share the digital strategy with you, although it is draft and we're still finishing off our targets in terms of KPIs and things. But I think what's really important is we've moved away from now using the digital to replicate what we're doing physically for access purposes into using digital opportunities in their own right. So back to the title, are the digital spectacles rose tinted? I don't think they are. I think they're very real. I think it offers us a very real opportunity to be more accessible in the most broadest sense. And I think it's something we need to embrace for the future and plan for and run with. And I think it will lead to not only broader audiences and engaged audiences, I think it has a very real possibility, and we're certainly planning for that, to assist in financial sustainability as well. So Hugh, if I've got a moment, I can unshare this and just take you quickly into the museum.
Sure, yeah.
Can you see that now?
Yep, we have that, yeah.
So welcome to the Paralympic Heritage Trust. I haven't got time to give you a whole tour, but we're standing outside of it and I can just swivel round and you can see that we are based in a sports stadium, Stoke Mandeville Stadium, built by Dr. Gutman. And I will take you very briefly into the Heritage Centre and give you a quick swivel around of our displays. So we have a display here on Dr. Gutman, and all these little dots here are where you can, if you hover over them, they'll show you the films, they'll give you the audio descriptions as well. But you can go into this on our website as well. We've got this wonderful timeline here from the 1940s through to the current games. Sports chair, wheelchair evolution, sports wheelchairs evolution, Paralympic moments, where would a sports museum be without those celebrations? Then you have some torches and ceremonies. And just round the corner, we also have a small temporary exhibition case, which is all about community involvement, latest donations that we can change very regularly. I'll just hover over that film so that you get to an idea of the depth of engagement you can do.
Ceremonies form a crucial part of the Paralympics and provide an opportunity for the host.
And all of those have been supported by local disability groups who did the audio description and the British Sign Language for us as well. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much, everyone. And I shall pass you back to Hugh.
Thank you very much, Vicky. That's been very revealing, very illuminating, and you've touched on a whole host of issues. I think your email is going to be very busy. I see a lot of people already asking if they can have a look at the strategy, which is obviously a key thing that is attractive. Just one very quick question. We'll take the questions at the end of the two presentations, but this one I think you could answer quickly. It's from Leanne Parry. Which platform do you use for the vlogs? Just could you answer that one?
YouTube. We use YouTube. So if you then, if you go into Twitter or Facebook, it's a YouTube link.
Okay, that's dealt with. That's these are the easy answers for the easy questions at the beginning. And we've got a few more and we'll come back to, but in terms of reach and everything, there's an issue here that we will have to address with the conference going forward. I should have mentioned at the start, we have 150 people have signed up to the conference, and had we, I think if we reflect back on Andrew's conference in Wales last year, I think we had probably half of that in real terms. So there is an issue for everybody in the changing circumstances about how we reach out to our different audiences, and we can talk about that later. So our second speaker this morning was our host last year, Dr. Andrew Hignell from the Heritage and Education Coordinator at the CC4 Museum of Welsh Cricket. He's our next speaker, and he's going to be, as ever, I think he's always bowled over with ideas. Bore da, Andrew.
Bore da, Hugh. Croeso, not croeso to Cardiff, but welcome to my home here in sunny St Fagans, the western suburb of the Welsh capital city. I've got a presentation as well, which I'm going to share with you for the next 12 minutes. So I hope that this is now visible to everyone. And in particular, I must say that we were delighted that cricket was one of the sports that was able to take place, albeit in a truncated way, during the summer. Of course, as I'm sure you all know, cricket is a summer sport, usually starting in April and finishing in September. Well, this year, the professional game didn't start at the county level until August, and we had August and September. And this is an action shot from one of the games, Glamorgan bowling and Somerset batting. That's the Somerset captain who's just batted. And as you can see, he's lost one of his stumps. I should say, though, that he had scored 155 by that stage, and Somerset were already on 544 for 3. So we'll gloss over what happened in that match. And what I'll do instead is I'll run through how bowled over we have been with ideas. So here we are, those of you who were able to join us last year. This is the museum which hosted this wonderful conference. And that's, unfortunately, a photograph of how the museum has been this summer. We have been closed. I'll go through some of the figures in a minute, but I'll also go through some of the fantastic ideas, some of the solutions, very similar to what Vicky just said in her excellent presentation, and share some ideas with you. So, March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic leading to the closure of our ground. We had plans for this year, the year of 2020, to have a target footfall of 22,000 people. We'd actually had 19,000 people in 2019, and we were hoping, as I say, for 22,000. We had 950 up until March the 4th. March the 4th, we had a local primary school in. The day before, we should have had a group of French students. They were coming to Cardiff from Big Pit, which is in Blaenavon, which for those of you who don't know your geography of South Wales, shame on you, but of course we are going into lockdown, so please don't take this journey in the next few days. But it's just to the north of Newport, about 45 minutes drive from Cardiff. Now, we waited for 2 hours wondering where the French groups were. They were coming down in 3 coaches. We had a message to say that they'd received at lunchtime a message from the French government to return. So it was a case of au revoir, and they had to quickly head back. We wondered what on earth was going on, but of course we now know all of the gory details. The gory details for us in terms of revenue, our tour revenue in 2019 yielded about £55,000 for us. In 2020, we've only had 1,400, and 85% of Glamorgan Cricket full-time staff were put on furlough, as well as all the casuals. That included my 4 tour guides, plus the school visits team. I was put on furlough. and I became a museum volunteer. So all of the things that I'm going to tell you, I've been doing in a voluntary capacity, whilst being, as I say, with the other 85% of Glamorgan's full-time staff on furlough. That did include the players and the coaches. So what did we do? We began in April with a series of virtual coffee mornings. Here's my team, my trusty team of volunteers, all of whom will spend sometimes 1 day, sometimes 2 days helping me in the museum. We have there on the left of the large photo with the red lanyard, Dr. Tony Peters, who also works as a volunteer at Glamorgan Archives. Anne Slavinsky there going through one of the boxes of items, and the Rogues Gallery on the right. Top left, Tony Davis, who looks after the museum on match days. We've then got Duncan Montgomery, who's looking after our modes operation. In the bottom left, Edwina Smart, who also is a local history librarian in Pontypridd. And finally, but not least, Wyn on the bottom right, who oversees all of the digitisation that we're doing. We met up, we had a chat. What can we do? We need to have an action plan. We can't just sit down and do nothing. We actually had chats with curators and archivists at other county clubs. We spoke at length with Dave Griffin at Derbyshire, John Philby at Sussex, and also we spoke to various people at Gloucestershire, Roger Gibbons in particular, the archivist there. We spoke to several other museum professionals in the Cardiff area, and we started to draft an action plan, an emergency plan. We discussed it as well with our museum mentor, Emma Chaplin. And as I said, every Wednesday morning for 2 hours virtually, we were thrashing out a series of ideas. Most important of all, we needed sign-off from senior management, the Glamorgan board and the senior management team, both of whom were meeting virtually. They agreed, and we also secured the help of some new volunteers. On the left, a gentleman called Stephen Hedges, whose father played for Glamorgan from 1950 until 1967. Stephen had just completed a master's in history at Swansea University. The gentleman with the beard, Alan Rhys-Chivers, is a journalist. He writes for y Golwg, which is the Welsh national newspaper, Welsh language newspaper, I should say. The young gentleman is Jan Gray, who's actually a student, second-year student at Cardiff University, reading history. He approached us wanting to do something. He's also a very talented young cricketer. And on the right, a very good friend of mine, Lawrence Hurricane, the former operations director at BBC Wales Sport in Llandaff in Cardiff. Lawrence took retirement. So we created a new team, new ideas, and we moved forward. We began in July. The first initiative, which Steve and also Alan undertook, was a series of weekly podcasts. We wanted to get a digital footfall. We wanted to have contact, because of course we are the Museum of Welsh Cricket. We're not the museum solely of Glamorgan cricket. We wanted to engage with people. It was always our plan that we would ultimately have displays, but now we were doing it in a different media. In fact, we had a whole series of excellent topics on Gowerton Cricket Club near Swansea, something on Pontypridd using Edwina's experience, disability cricket, cricket in Aberystwyth as well. We looked at Pembrokeshire cricket. We also looked at the junior development pathway. We did have some others, which I'll mention in a minute. And it wasn't just the ancient, because of course for us, the history of cricket is what happened yesterday as well. We then started some daily tweets. And you can see here 2 examples. I'm sure many of you do this as well. On this day in Welsh cricket, did you know as well about how you could get a railway carriage for £7 in Ammanford? I think the prices haven't changed very much with Arriva Trains Wales, but anyway. But what we've done is we have built a series through our social media channel, We've built a series of tweets as well, looking at grounds and also pavilions. We've also, of course, used it to promote the podcasts. And here's the one that had a lot of hits, which was when we had our own version of Yes Minister. The gentleman on the left is Mark Drakeford. You may have seen him recently on national TV. He's the Welsh First Minister. His predecessor, Carwyn Jones, top right, and below bottom right is Vaughan Gethin, the Welsh Health Minister, all of whom are solid citizens and huge cricket fans. They all have a story to tell. And they were quite willing, even though Mark Drakeford was engaged in conversation with Boris Johnson, Mark freely gave his time. We had a lot of hits on there. We enhanced our website. We already had the top strap line there, but the one below, we started working on that because Glamorgan next year will celebrate an anniversary, 100 years as a first-class cricket club. And we also added on our new website a lot of the education work that we've been doing, as well as our work on commemorating and also celebrating what happened in the Second World War as far as Glamorgan cricketers past and their actions. What we also did, we put, as I said earlier, some new features on the cricket grounds of Wales and the cricket pavilions of Wales. And that led to this photo appearing from Carew in Pembrokeshire, dated 1936. I don't think this photo had been seen before. You can see Lord Emlyn there with his horse and cart, celebrating here the opening of the pavilion at their ground. It hadn't been seen before, and the gentleman who passed it on to us, if you just look over as you're looking at it, Lord Emlyn's right shoulder, it's a young boy there, second from the right in the window. We believe that that young boy, now an old man, is still alive, and we're hoping to make contact with him for his memories. So oral history and capturing an oral story that we wouldn't have been able to do had it not been for these things being made available to us on our website. We've had remote volunteering. You couldn't get more remote, apologies for anyone on the call from North Wales, but you couldn't get more remote than a 5-hour car journey from Cardiff to Colwyn Bay and back again. Impossible really to do in the day, but this is just one example of us making contact with cricket clubs throughout South Wales and hoping as well by diversifying in North Wales, Mid Wales, and even on the island of Anglesey, capturing stories, picking up information that has yet to be seen on a public stage. We've also started doing Zoom talks and Zoom films. I did the first one on Tuesday night, and the gentleman there on the left, a man called Tim Mathias, who appeared last year at our remembrance event. His father was a Glamorgan cricketer in the 1920s, and Tim will be reappearing via Zoom in January as we look back at Glamorgan cricket's first decade as a first-class county. So let me finish by talking about the impact in numbers, those initiatives that we put in place. Of course, cricket being a game of numbers, there you can see the scoreboard showing that the team batting are 44. No prizes for guessing that it's actually Glamorgan who are batting, but the positive numbers here on the screen. Back in June, we actually had contact with 43 out of the 171 accredited cricket clubs in Wales. I'm delighted to say that as of Monday, we now have links with 74. So in the space of 4 months, we've had a 72% increase. And obviously we're hoping that'll continue. We can get our first 100 of the year by Christmas, and we can chisel away so that as many of those 171 as possible we will have contact with. Our podcast downloads, the very first one was with our former groundsman. We had 34 downloads within 48 hours of the podcast going live. Our most successful one There's been the story here of Asian cricket in Cardiff and the current Glamorgan player, Prem Sisodia, one of the stars of our T20 team. 167 within 48 hours of it going live. And our average now is actually 80. And some of the podcasts have been through the medium of Welsh. And there on the left-hand side, Edward Bevan, the very long-serving BBC Wales cricket commentator, who has contributed, and as I said earlier, Alan Rhys-Chivers, with his links with Ogolwg, he has been able to oversee that. If you don't know the gentleman on the right, it's Viv Richards, the great West Indian batsman, who did play for Glamorgan as well. So to finish, we believe that these metrics are going to be fantastic for us as we move forward in this new, whatever the new normal is going to be. In recent weeks, we've been seeking grant assistance from MALD through their Transformational Capital Grant Scheme. I'm delighted to say that on Tuesday, I received a letter to say that we've successfully passed stage 1. We now have to submit a stage 2 application. I'm sure I'll have some fantastic numbers to put on the form when I submit it in January. We're also waiting to hear from the Welsh Government through their Cultural Recovery Fund. £53 million has been made available to help museums throughout Wales to remain vibrant, viable and sustainable. And we believe that what we've done here in the CC4 Museum of Welsh Cricket has actually helped us to be vibrant, viable and sustainable in the most difficult of times. We've also, on a small scale, we've approached the Heritage Fund for one of their 15-minute grants. And what we're hoping to do is to link up with a cricket club. You probably won't have heard of Llantwit Fardry, which is very near Pontypridd and Llantrisant. If you remember the Royal Mint, that's where money, if you remember that, that's where the money would be minted. And they're a small club, a very successful club. And what we're hoping to do in the coming months is to produce a research toolkit, which we then can roll out so that other people can actually go out and research and gather information about their history and heritage. So here we are, just to finish off. This was us back in 2019. Paul Edwards on the left there, engaging with some of the local school children who were coming in to learn about the history and heritage of cricket in Wales. And we hope that what we've done is a step in the right direction of making us more robust and resilient for whatever 2021 and post-COVID brings. And I have to finish, obviously, by, in keeping with another cricketing metaphor. I hope after this quick run through, you don't think that we've been stumped at all. And apologies here to Robert Croft, the long-serving Morgan all-rounder, for showing this photo. But I have to finish by saying I have seen milk turn quicker than Robert Croft. Unfortunately, he was out-stumped there by the Northants wicketkeeper. So I hope that that has given you a little insight into what we have been doing here at the CC4 Museum of Welsh Cricket. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much for listening.
Andrew, thank you. Diolch indeed, and plenty food for thought there. And you can see from all the questions that are coming in, there's plenty of interest in some of the things you have been doing, some of the solutions you've found, and obviously no surprise to anyone, a lot of interest in how some of these changes are being financed and what support you are getting from in your different settings. I'm sure there's a pot of Welsh gold somewhere, Andrew, that you'll be able to tap into. But if I could just pick up on a couple of these questions, I'm pleased to say that Isabel has joined us from Australia, and I'll put her, she's got two questions. I'll roll some of them into one to save time, and I'll address a couple of the first questions to Vicky, because we may lose her at the end of the session. Just a brief point on your virtual tour, Vicky, which was really impressive how you managed to do that. Would you be, we had one person asking if you'd be happy to share a little bit more information about how you put it together. And I believe it was Matterport who organised that for you. Could you share some of that detail with us briefly?
Yep. Well, it wasn't Matterport is the digital platform on which it sits. We actually commissioned it through a local company called Venue View. The one for that heritage centre that you looked at, it's because it's a small space, cost us £500. And then as far as embedding things like the films are concerned, they're just embedding the films we've already got in the heritage centre. But the audio descriptions were done for free through our local Bucks Vision. And they were, you know, really delighted to kind of support the work we're doing. And so it's not an expensive thing to carry out at all. And you provide the films and any detail that you want on highlighting specific objects to Venue View, excuse me, and they just add it all in to the 3D film they produce. And the end result is you have this doll's house, what they call a doll's house, and you can view it as a video walkthrough, or you can manipulate it on your screen as I did, or you can put 3D goggles on and watch it that way.
Just a question to develop that to both of you. Andrew, first of all, perhaps, is or two issues. What are your top tips for people who might be feared or scared to get involved with this stuff because the technology is so new? Is much of this being driven by volunteers or the actual expertise? Are you having to hire it in? Is there a balance, or are you favouring one, letting volunteers? Are you finding enough volunteers, or do you have to go for professional help? Andrew?
Yeah, that's a superb question, Hugh. Luckily, as I hope I showed there, we've been really lucky in getting volunteers with very specific skill sets and experience. Stephen Hedges, as I said, just finishing a master's in history. He professional librarian, and he is been fascinated with oral history. So he, as it were, has picked up those skills to have the resources as well as a volunteer of a professional journalist, Alan Rees-Chivers, who's bilingual, and again does work, produces podcasts for other organisations in Wales. So we're sort of piggybacking there, I should say, on those skills, and at the same time having Lawrence Hurahane's knowledge built over many years walking for the BBC, both in London and in Cardiff, and then having a young student coming along, Jan, who again has got access at Cardiff University to resources. But what we found is there are some fantastic webinars, there is some fantastic online assistance. Again, through this particular organisation, I have to say thanks. Russell Todd has been extremely helpful as a fellow resident in Cardiff, but we've spoken to our museum mentor, Emma Chaplin, of course, the chair of the Association of Independent Museums, and she's put us in touch with a lot of people. And there is a real goodwill factor out there. People don't want to see things wither on the vine. And we were always going to be thinking of a digital delivery. It's just come, again, to use the cricketing metaphor, it's come rather fast or fast medium rather than sort of slow off breaks as we initially had in our plan. But we've been very lucky. As I say, the volunteers have been out there. We've done things on a shoestring. Glamorgan Cricket obviously have helped out, and the enhanced website that we've started, it's by no means complete, but we've just got a better web presence, and the Glamorgan Cricket media team have helped out there. So it's all of us working together, working in a new future.
I suppose, Vicky, you highlighted, I think, the cost effective. It's not enormously expensive to do a lot of these things, but how do you cope with the training? Are you finding Andrew's very lucky? I think there he's got a great set of circumstances have unfolded for him. Are you lucky in that same way?
Well, I think there's a little bit of Andrew in the sense of recruiting specific volunteers, and also we had a recruitment on trustees. But I think more importantly, kind of prior to that, way back in March, suddenly there were things available. So a company called Tech Pixies did some free training. Within a few weeks, organisations like the Association of Independent Museums and the Arts Council were putting out some training. But I think the one thing that really did it for me was some stuff from Tech Pixies, which was people don't want, I think we've grown up in this age of your film has to be perfect. Actually, people want it to be very human. If the dog barks, if the cat walks over, it's okay. It just makes you human. So it didn't have to be technically perfect. It didn't have to be sound perfect. So you didn't feel under pressure to produce something like that. And I think that was important. When it comes to the volunteers, we've got a couple of volunteers who, of an age where technology isn't something they've grown up with at all, who actually just found they embraced it. But we had others who are equally nervous, so we still need to do more training and support with them. But so I think it depends on the individual and how they feel, and if they've got an iPad at home that they currently use. But apart, cost-wise, there was no cost in doing that at all. You can go into Zoom and film yourself on Zoom. So a lot of people are very comfortable with Zoom. If they're comfortable with Zoom, tell them to go into Zoom. You can go in with them. You can take your film off and you can film them talking about an object or sharing a story. So it's finding the medium they're comfortable within and doing it within that medium.
But that touches on something Dame Sarah said earlier, and she was reflecting on the fact that she was dealing with snail mail, no mobile phones and everything else, and all of a sudden we are having to make more rapid changes in shorter times. How much of a challenge, or the balance, one question has come in, that how much of your time is now taken with resilience efforts as to delivering your core activities? How are you managing to balance these two separate activities?
Do you want to go first, Andrew?
Yeah, no, on you go, ladies first.
I think the kind of resilient stuff has become part of our core activities, if I'm honest with you. So we've got that up and running, but what we've done is we've created this digital strategy, and at the same time we're redoing our 5-year strategy. We had another 1.5 years of that, but we're rewriting our 5-year strategy. But we kicked that off with doing the digital side to make sure that it wasn't an add-in, but it was kind of embedded at the start. So I think from a resilience, we weren't dependent on charging people to come in. So we haven't been under that pressure that many other people have been. We've been fortunate in that way. But we've certainly lost income in terms of taking university students round. And what we're in the process of doing now as part of our digital strategy is bringing in, we'll be putting out a brief shortly to bring in a communications company to actually manage these much higher ambitions in terms of building our digital audiences and analysing that as well, and helping us make our social media even more exciting.
Andrew, could you say something about the toolkit for research while you're answering because it is related to somebody's asking if you could explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'll just start off by echoing what Vicky said. I suppose we're very fortunate in being a fully accredited museum, and we do have a forward plan. We do have a museum mentor. We do plan things very carefully over a 6-month cycle. We have our medium term and our long term goals, as I mentioned earlier. And we're also very lucky that there is within Cardiff a very, very good network. I know on the call there are staff from Glamorgan Archives, we've also got the Cardiff Museum, which used to be the Cardiff Story. And at the same time, there, and again, I think on the call this morning are people from the Arms Park, the Cardiff Rugby Museum. So there is a little network of people that we've been able to talk to as well. And to use the government's phrase, we're all in it together. And it's been good to talk, and it's been good to share ideas and to pick up ideas. I didn't have time, but there were lots and lots of other things that we could have done, which we haven't done. But we've just chosen certain ones that we believe will be very, very helpful. Now, to just go down the idea of the research toolkit, it is something that we've talked about with our museum mentor for the last 18 months. And I think it was something that was discussed at the conference last year, which was having digital, to have heritage champions at various cricket clubs or different regions throughout Wales. As I said, doing my Eric Morecambe, it was the wrong words, sorry, the right words, but not in the right order. We've also been able to discover some digital champions. And if you marry the two together, then so you've got a digital heritage champion, you're in a fantastic scenario. The guy from Llantwit Vardre, who also works at Cardiff University, who's approached us, and it's simply because of the tweets that we've been putting out, coming up with some weird and wacky facts. And Llantwit Vardre know nothing. They know that they were formed in 1908. They know that they've got a castle on their badge. They know the club folded for a short while before the Second World War. They play at Central Park, not in New York, but Central Park in Church Village. They share facilities with the local rugby club. They know about the last 20 or 30 years, but they know very little about those early years. Yet there are older people in the community. So what we're looking at doing, and this links in with some work I used to do with Dr. Peter Davis at Huddersfield University. I think Brian Sanderson is on the call, and Brian was part of the Huddersfield team as well. And what Dr. Peter Davis was doing was capturing the cricketing history and heritage of Calderdale and Kirklees. I just went along as a historical geographer. You might think I'm more of a hysterical geographer at times, but anyway, but as a historical geographer, talking through census books, enumerators books, all the things which are meat and drink for academic researchers, but trying to put it into a cricketing context. So I've got a lot of these PowerPoints already prepared, using my colleague, as I say, in particular Dr. Tony Peters, who's a volunteer at Glamorgan Archives. I know Glamorgan Archives run a very, very good programme. So what we're hoping to do, together with Pontypridd Local History Library, Edwina Smart, again, one of our volunteers, it's going to be a meeting, hopefully, of like minds, and we can put a digital toolkit together. So using Llantwit Vardre Cricket Club as the exemplar material, and hopefully we can show how you can go from zero to a far better scenario. And there's so much material online. Welsh newspapers online, that's the English language as well as the Welsh language versions. The People's Collection Wales, there's a treasure trove of digital information out there. So if people are frightened of dipping a toe in the water, I would use the phrase Sarah Story used, just dive in, plunge in and enjoy it.
There's some very useful information and some good links appearing on the chat at the moment. The Digital Culture Network, for example, and some sources, although I do see somebody's had difficulty getting into that. We'll investigate some of these issues that are coming up, but there are sources. I presume both of you, and hardly anybody in the audience, I would imagine, would have had global pandemic high on your risk register. One of the ironies of all of this, I suspect, and we're beginning to hear it from both of you, is that what has happened has catapulted your organization and your effort onto a completely different level with new opportunities, new challenges. I mean, that has come as a complete surprise to everybody, just the way the benefits of having to adapt to what is a desperate situation.
Yeah, in my previous life as a schoolmaster, I went through about 3 or 4 different school inspections and doing paperwork, and I can always remember my very first one. Sat down, surrounded by some staff, and there I am, young, innocent, wet behind the ears, and all the rest, and thinking, crikey, this is so frightening. And I can remember one of the senior members of the staff room got up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please never forget that a threat is always an opportunity." He sat back down. Yeah. And I took that on board. A threat is an opportunity. 3 fantastic words, and 4 fantastic words, I should say. I can count. But I agree with you about the risk register. Yeah. Never in our wildest dreams. And I'm glad to say that cricket museums don't appear in my wildest dreams, but never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that we would have gone from, like those figures I mentioned, from 19,000 visitors in 2019 down to just 950. Never. But we've got more than that because we've embraced the digital technology. We've got the digital footfall. I know it's harder to enumerate, but we're getting those statistics, and we can build on that, so we can then return to a post-COVID world where we do try to get 22,000. We hopefully get more than that, and we build on these links. And I think the exposure, certainly, that we've had in West Wales, Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Aberystwyth, those places I mentioned on the podcasts, people will say, well, actually, we enjoyed that. Let's actually go and see the museum. Let's go and have a stadium tour. Let's go and do it. And in fact, that's what we're offering to Llantwit Vardre in the research toolkit that we're putting together for people who are going to be giving up their time to do the research. We want to reward people, so we will invite, free of charge, the club to come down, have a behind-the-scenes guided tour, and one of the bonuses that we can offer is that we can then get them free tickets for matches at our cricket ground. And so that, we hope, will be the carrot, the hook, and we can reward people. They then go back there buzzing, and then it's this sustainability and building it on then to whatever's next.
So Vicky, it looks as if your immediate challenge is scaling up because of the demand, and I pick up this sense from projects I'm involved with myself, that there's a sense of not just that the pandemic is overwhelming people, but the reaction people are having to put in, or the systems and the progress that outfits like ourselves are having to put in place. How are you scaling up, or how are you going to scale up from your relatively modest but remarkable environment that you have there?
Well, it's the digital that enables us to do that. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is actually the digital and the capability to do this has been around for a very long time, you know, through Adobe Connect and Skype and FaceTime, quite frankly. And we just haven't embraced it. And this has forced us to embrace it. And in doing so, it has highlighted the ability to scale up. I think the problem it's given us is, going back to what Andrew was saying, is that we're not valuing digital audience as we do people who physically come into our space, but we should be. It's just a different type of engagement. Or is it? You know, if I take somebody on a virtual tour and can give them a personalized tour and can share objects from our collections with them in the way that we're talking now, surely that's as enriching. So I think the digital gives us that opportunity to scale up without massive resources, both in terms of people resources and other. So, you know, I think we resolve that slightly. And again, it goes back to, a lot of you out there are confident with Zoom now. Don't forget about Facebook. Facebook was wonderful for us. We did some live workshops. We did some, I can't see them on my desk at the moment, but some origami kind of related to Tokyo in 1964. And that way you can engage with your audience. That they put comments in, you can start messaging them then.
Mm-hmm.
So that's real engagement, much easier than if you do it on, tweeting and other things. So that ability to scale up comes through the digital side.
But is there any sense, personally speaking, I'm at times overwhelmed by Zoomery. We've discovered it, and it has taken our lives over. I find I'm not spending so much time in the car, but I'm being more productive. But at the same time, the demands on people's time, the demands on volunteers' times is becoming even more critical. I'm finding that volunteers are being asked to do more all the time because of their own productivity, which is a function of the technology.
I think it's a real important thing for the balance in there. I mean, our volunteers have been great on Zoom and getting on with things, but actually they're also itching to get back, and they're itching to get on with some of the box listing and meet people in person. Yeah. So I think maintaining a balance is really, really important. And a lot of people come in and volunteer because they want companionship, and companionship on Zoom just doesn't cut it, actually. It was okay in lockdown. It did give that.
That's nothing personal, Andrew. Nothing personal whatsoever.
No. So I do think that's really important to kind of get that balance. And we miss going into the office and having a chat over coffee and not looking at a screen. And a screen has a different type of tiring to it as well. And as we've come out of the strict lockdown, obviously people have been distracted. So it's interesting looking at the engagement numbers, which have kind of leveled out a bit, I would say. Yeah. So how do you bring that back in? How do you balance it with your physical delivery? And I think the one thing I should have said earlier, if people are worried that if they have a virtual tour available, people won't visit, the evidence on that, and Oxford University Museums have done a lot of research on it, is that if anything, it will encourage them to visit. So don't be afraid of sharing, because it brings people in other ways.
Andrew, can I just ask one of your cricketing colleagues, Steve from Notts Cricket, has asked, is anybody actually recording the impact of COVID on the sport, as a separate entity? Is that part of your function at any point, or are you consumed with delivery?
At the moment, we are in the museum, we are looking at delivery. I should say, just to remind you, that Glamorgan Cricket deals with the professional game in Wales, and we are the only professional cricket club. But there is Cricket Wales, who look after the recreational games, all those 171 accredited clubs and others throughout the Principality. So there are people within Cricket Wales who are doing exactly that. And one of the Zoom talks, or one of the Zoom films, maybe in a couple of years' time, will be the impact of COVID. Hopefully by then, we will be back in the new normal. But we are doing that, and in the same way that I showed on the presentation about, we've looked back at times of hardship, we've looked back at the First World War, obviously Second World War. We've also had people who've talked to, and we've had visitors with post-traumatic stress disorder who served in the Falklands and in the Iraq wars. Gulf Wars, etc. So I'm sure there will be an element of the impact of COVID on cricket coming out in 2 or 3 years' time, when hopefully we're through. Just to go back to what you were just saying in terms of the virtual tour and everything else, the one thing that we have deliberately not done, and it is in a way our USP, for those of you who made the conference last year, you will remember that below the museum, we're on the first floor of the National Cricket Centre. We have a large indoor hall where the young people, the museum visitors, the groups, the schools, the clubs who visit us can go and practice their skills. And in no way whatsoever have we tried to replicate that experience. And I know that that USP that we have and being able to visit on a match day, once the stadium reopens, God willing, that is something that we have kept as our USP, and we haven't tried to replicate it in any way by having some of these virtual games. You can go off, the youngsters can tell you about all their iPad games and things like that. They're freely available at a small charge, of course. So we haven't done that. But we think exactly what Vicky said is that by having more information about what we offer in terms of visits, by engaging with people in a virtual way, it's actually going to make that face-to-face visit in reality, in real time, even more meaningful when we return. So it's going to be a win-win.
Sorry, Vicky, isn't the reality really that we're in the new normal already, Vicky? This is it. This is the way it's going to be.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think it's people aren't going to, certainly a lot of our visitors, 30% of people who visit us have got a disability. They're in a vulnerable group. Mm-hmm. So, that's one of the things that has been very much in our forethought. But no, I think you're right. I think, the schools are under such pressure. Actually, it's easier for them to come on a virtual tour than not. Or I've heard of other museums getting together really good outreach activity boxes. I think that's important because you cannot, from our point of view, the delight in holding a Paralympic torch or putting on a medal or a 2012 jacket, you can't replicate that physically. But if you could do a combination of taking them on a tour, even if you're in your museum and you're doing it on an iPad, combined with perhaps them having a box of items that they can pick up and you can talk about. So yes, I think this is the new norm. I can't, over the next year, we've just got to deliver. People are going to be they're already weary. We're not shaking hands. We're not kissing in welcome. People are worried about touching things, touching your bag, and that's not going to go away quickly.
Sorry for interrupting you, Andrew, while we've still got Vicky, can I just ask both of you, it's a question that's come in about whether you've done or had time indeed to do any audience consultation or research on your digital offers, or whether you're basing your digital offers on what your existing functions were. In other words, have you lain on your current experience, or are you asking people, which is sometimes risky, asking them what they want to see?
We have asked, and in fact, we organised a British Sign Language tour, and it was for a daytime activity. So there was myself on Zoom and the signer, and then we were in the Heritage Centre, and we didn't get any takers. And so we had about 20 people interested. And so we went back to them afterwards and we said, well, why didn't you attend? And they all came back and they were so grateful that we were putting things like that on, but we got the timing wrong. But then we've since had feedback that actually a BSL tour on Zoom isn't ideal, because you're then looking at the little box of the people doing the signing and not at the space itself. So we're having to rethink that a little bit. Likewise with the tours, because it was so new doing them live, we went back to people afterwards, is that what you expected? How do you feel after that? How do you think that would compare to being there virtually? And we've had no negative feedback from that whatsoever. They've said that, of course, they would love to come virtually, but they kind of got a sense of the space and being somewhere different and learning. So that was almost more important to them at that point than having to be within a physical space.
Andrew?
Yeah, in terms of audience research, we do have a sort of a core clientele of between 30 and 40 people who turn up regularly to our Winter Museum talks, who will attend the matches at Cardiff, are well-known supporters. They'll meet up as well through another Glamorgan Cricket organisation for lunches during the winter, the presentations. So talking to those 30 or 40 people, just trying to find out what they want, that's helped to shape the talk, the subjects for the talks. It's also helped to shape some of the podcast topics. And in fact, in the first 3 or 4, both Steve and also Alan Rees-Chivers, they were actually saying, they were, again, to keep the cricketing metaphors going, they were making appeals. They were saying, is there anything you would like to say? And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, Llantwit Vardre came to us having listened to the podcasts. We've had now some gentlemen who used to play in club cricket in North Wales. One gentleman in particular called John Bell, heavily associated with Marchwheel Hall near Wrexham. He now lives in the United States, and we wouldn't have had that interaction. There's no way he would have come across for a museum visit, but we have, as it were, by putting out an appeal within the club cricket community in Wales and using the digital platforms which are there, people have only been too willing to come forward. We've actually met, I have to say, we've met with a far better response than actually going to a cricket club and saying, have you got some memorabilia you want to put in the displays? In fact, that's going to lead us to actually now considering how we actually embrace, what do we use the display cabinets for? Do we need more delivery mechanisms? Do we need to put some iPads in there to run more of the little films, etc.? Because it's, as Vicky said, it's the new normal. It's what people are used to. I should say as well, one of the other big bonuses is the reminiscence work with older generations. And we sort of stumble, to put it politely, we sort of stumbled along and we'd done little bits, but nothing really meaningful. And now we've got some great traction in that area. And there are people who are embracing the technology and want to talk and have suddenly realized it is actually quite easy. And it is actually then helping to tick those boxes on isolation, loneliness, and you're only a Zoom call away, aren't you, really? And I've done some with a reminiscence group in the Rhondda Valley, where there were 4 gentlemen, the facilitator, myself, and I thought I'm going to be talking for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour. 2 hours later, and I could not stop those 4 gentlemen from talking. And one of them just happened to be a schoolboy back in 1948 when Glamorgan won the county championship. And I heard his stories. He said, oh, I've just remembered this. And off he went. I'd never heard these reminiscences. So we're actually building up this treasure trove of oral history as well. So we're actually, it's going to sound quite bizarre, but I think we're actually, at the end of it, we're going to find ourselves in a better place.
Can I add something to that as well, which I think is important? I think that there is a need for more research and into the audiences. And in fact, the brief that we're just finishing off, that we'll be advertising for a company to come in, a communications company, the first part of the work they'll be doing is analysing those audiences and talking to people to get a real sense of I mean, we can see from the statistics the things people liked more than others, but we need to get some much stronger evidence and research, and we'll be doing that kind of December, January time.
Yeah, I don't know how you're doing for time, Vicky, whether you're having to leave us. Are you okay for another question?
Yes, I'm okay for another question. Yeah.
Well, let's give you the opportunity then, and I'll throw it to Andrew as well as we bring this to a close in the last 10 minutes or so. What's your immediate priority? There's so much happening. How do you see your way through this when we're at the hand, we're at the hands of different governments here, different policies, different lockdowns, different closures, different resilience funding? It's a morass of activity. Where do you see your priorities being in the next weeks, even days, but never mind months and looking further ahead?
I think that we think worst case scenario. I think we think lockdown and what we can do in lockdown. And then partnered with that is keeping on board our volunteers. We're so volunteer reliant and they're so important to us and they do such a good job. So it's those to me are the two priorities. Think worst case scenario, think what we can do in getting some of those volunteers back with some face-to-face time, and having a really flexible approach, because it has been the shifting environment means that we've all done a lot of additional work, to be COVID safe, and then we're not going to be able to open, and then we can open and we can open partly. So I think planning for worst case scenario with all the ability to adapt and be flexible and keep your core team of volunteers on board and keep communicating digitally to those audiences you've got.
Yeah, I suppose, Andrew, the reality is that the web and Zoom and all that, it never sleeps. I mean, we're communicating live just now with Isabel in Melbourne. There is no closure or lockdown in some senses, because this is happening all the time.
Yeah, it's 24/7, full on. I'm doing a Zoom on November the 12th with a gentleman called David Hemp, who used to play for Glamorgan and Warwickshire, is now a resident in Melbourne and is actually taking over as the Pakistan women's coach. And I don't know, he told me the other night, he said, Higgers, I'm not sure if I'm going to be in Karachi or I'm going to be back here, but we'll do it somehow. So we're, again, keeping the cricketing metaphors going, we're breaking those boundaries, and we're not being constrained by those boundaries. But I think just, I'd agree with everything that Vicky just said, but I think there's one thing you said a minute ago about priorities, and it's the one thing I haven't really mentioned in the presentation or in this discussion. It's the one thing that we haven't been able to do. Our hands are tied with our school visits. We have a great program of us going into schools, going in with handling objects, going in with players to talk, going in with coaches, and doing the actual fun things in the schoolyard. Now, obviously, schools in Wales, just like schools in the rest of the country and probably in other parts of the world as well, there are massive restrictions on people going in there, and I know from talking with head teachers, again, we've got a little core panel of head teachers locally who I communicate with. And for obvious reasons, I'm not going to name the schools, but two of the head teachers have both said that they are worried about the physical and mental well-being of some of their younger children in particular, who some of their year threes, their year fours, who would be starting their physical journey, as it were, their sporting journey, and they're off school, they're at home. There's obviously been the campaign to tackle childhood obesity as well. And I know these two particular head teachers are worried that when it gets to February, March, in what sort of state are some of these children going to be, having been caged up like little tigers and lionesses for such a long period of time. So that really is one of our big challenges. And just to mention another organisation, again, thanks to Cardiff City Council, who we have a great link with through a programme called the Cardiff Commitment. We have been put in touch with an organisation called Speakers for Schools, who actually, and this is the F word that I love hearing, it's free of charge. And they're a charity, and they will organise speakers, virtual speakers going into schools, but also they'll facilitate through Google Classrooms and other platforms, which are all part of what's called the Hub, HWB network within schools in Wales. They will facilitate virtual work experience as well. So some of the things that we do with schools when youngsters come in years 7 and 8 thinking about their GCSE options, they come to a cricket ground, have a nice time, obviously. They learn about all the different jobs and the skills that people will do behind the scenes, what it takes to go into sports physiotherapy, all those value-added things. And then we can talk about how cricket kit evolved over time and all the rest of it. So we're going to be putting out a few feelers probably February, March in terms of these virtual deliveries in schools. Vicky, I see your
I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to depart, but I've been looking at the questions and I know people want me to share some of the research and other things, and certainly I can do that. And I'll keep on sharing sort of through Sporting Heritage, particularly when we undertake our research later this year. I'm sure people will be interested in that too. But thank you so much, everyone. And I'm so sorry I have to leave a bit early. I have a broken arm and a broken leg that needs seeing to. So not doing.
All I can say, two things, Vicky. Thank you very much, and take care. Please take care.
I will. I'm not going to race.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Andrew, we can take this to the conclusion in the 5 minutes or so that we've got left. There's been one interesting suggestion there from Vicky Hope Walker that instead of changing exhibitions, you could possibly look at 3D filming the exhibitions. I don't know, have you investigated that at all? Yeah,
I've had a chat with various companies. Again, I'm amazed at how cheap some of the costs are. I'm sure there are some companies who are thinking, sprats to catch mackerels, etc. But obviously there has to be it has to be of a certain standard, because again, we're all now used to a very high level digital delivery. Everything's gone smoothly this morning, and touch wood, I'm sure it'll go the same for the rest of the conference. But
thanks for that, Andrew.
That's okay. I'm sure it will. But the bottom line is that people's digital expectations, the bar has been raised, yeah. And I just hope that the people offering some of these packages are not sort of the ones who don't have any work coming in because the quality of what they do isn't great. But I would say that we are another idea that we're thinking of. We could have done it, which was a digital newsletter. We were thinking, and this is something that John Philby and the team at Sussex County Cricket Club at Hove have very successfully done. They've created a Friends organisation. I know lots of other museums have it, and it was something with our museum mentor this time last year. We said, okay, yeah, let's explore that. And having a paper-based copy, so when people come in, they can pick it up, and having a few digital copies available on request. Well, yeah. We suddenly realized that we're not going to have people coming in to pick things up. So we've kept our digital newsletter as something to come later. We felt, again, sometimes less is more, rather than having a fantastic new selection of all these wonderful offerings. A bit like going in, if you remember the old sweet shops, or even the wonders of Woolworths. I'm sure other shops did a very good job as well, where you could go in and you could get your 10 custard creams and your jammy dodgers and all the rest. But we felt that if we suddenly came out and we spread ourselves too thinly, that would actually have a negative impact. As I said, the volunteers who you saw in my presentation, they had specific skill sets for podcasts and having tweets and things like that. Not necessarily a newsletter, which will need an editor, will need then all sorts of other sort of back-end skills, behind-the-scenes skills. Those volunteers may come in after Christmas, so we can implement that. But my biggest tip to finish on would be, again, using a cricketing metaphor, just practice at what you're good at. And if you've got certain shots on the offside or on the leg side, or if you've got certain balls as a bowler, don't be afraid to focus on those skills. Don't try to be something that you're not. You know, let's build up, and hopefully everyone can taste some success in this new world that we live in.
Yeah, I suppose we all like to play, or should play to our strengths anyway. But just one very final point, and briefly, one of the challenges we've had to meet in because of the rural nature of some of our projects and people living in literally in isolation where they're away from that. Care homes are specific issues. You mentioned schools. Our access to care homes stopped very quickly and very, very finally, because there's been literally no access whatsoever. So we had to adapt by not even using Zoom was effective, because not everybody had access. Even within the care homes, people were being isolated in individual rooms. So we had to come up with very difficult. Is that something you've had to deal with in Wales? And
yeah, on a personal level, my mother went into a care home this time last year, and my mother-in-law in August went into a nursing home. So I've got lots of experience, and I know how difficult it is. But luckily, what we have been doing now, this is from the Cricket Museum point of view, and it's a skill that I learned with my own mother's experience here in Cardiff, was that a lot of care homes are actually getting tablets and the electronic version, I should say. And there are ways and means now of actually having some form of contact. It is hard, because then I know that when we have tried it, just having one, you know, like us now, it works far better with a second person as well. And simply because of the way the technology works, someone might be a little bit afraid of just looking at a screen and talking. It's this Orwellian 1984 has become 2020, but it's this Orwellian world that we're in, that certain people enjoy the tactile nature and the other interpersonal things that they have always been used to and they've grown up with. And this is this new highfalutin whatever. But I'm sure that in time, when we're allowed back in, even if it's with, you know, full PPE and all the rest, certainly going in and working with people in care, people in nursing homes, and capturing those reminiscences, that's only going to add to this rich tapestry of stories and archives that we're starting to build. And the beauty, of course, is that they're going to be kept, hopefully, in some digital store. My only slight downside is, where do all these tweets, where do all those archives go? Because a lot of social media is transient. And whilst I think that you have to have research on the impact, I think there should be some research in what's next. So where do the tweets go? And if people are looking back at the summer of 2020, it's important to know that what was being tweeted, rather than in the summer of 2021, knowing what's being tweeted then. So there's some other research channels there.
Yeah, it's not so much what next, it's what's now, which brings me neatly to a close. And thank you very much for your time, Andrew, and to Vicky. Also, it's been a really illuminating opening session. I think lots of food for thought, lots of people looking for further information about things that have been said or perhaps not said. So we'll follow these up. I should say in passing as well that you may all be wondering where our illustrious chief executive is, Justine. I've been standing in for Justine, who's slightly incapacitated and for once in her life not able to make herself heard. And she is with us and she's contributed to organising the conference, but unfortunately she's not able to communicate with everyone as she would wish at the moment, but we wish her well in her recovery from her little procedure, which has left her slightly incapacitated. So you mentioned Jammy Dodgers, Andrew. It's 11 o'clock. It's time for us to recharge our kettles. We reconvene. I should say we will hear more about the care homes issue tomorrow in a session about memories and reminiscence in the afternoon, but we'll be reconvening at 11:30, where we'll be talking a very important subject again, policy and funding relating to sporting heritage. So thank you to everybody who's been involved, Sarah, Vicky and Andrew, and we look forward to picking up the session again at 11:30. Thank you very much.